Hey, thanks for checking out my video. I'm Olivia, and today I'm going to talk about all the palettes I used in July. First of all, I would like to just say I'm shocked that it's already August. In fact, as I'm filming this, it's halfway through August. I feel like this year has gone by like faster than any other years in my lifetime so far. Does anybody else feel that way? Anyway, I'm excited to film this video. I am filming it a little bit late, so I'm sorry for that. I did get this idea from Kay at Makeup Lens. I'm not sure if she started this series in general, but I did discover this video idea from her. She's been doing these videos for a very long time. She does them monthly as well. So if you like this type of video and you're looking for more content to watch, then I'll leave her channel linked down below. But otherwise, I just want to jump right into it. My June palette roundup was a little bit on the longer side, so I'm going to try to be a little less chatty today. I'm going to try and speed things up a little bit. So, I mean, don't hold me to it. I go off on a lot of tangents, but we're going to do our best. So in the month of July, I used 25 different palettes. Sometimes I do tend to mix palettes together and use 2 or 3 things to create one look. I don't feel like I did that as much as I did in June, so hopefully this video will be a little less all over the place as that one was. And I did also take pictures of almost all the looks that I did throughout the month, so I'll include those as well. So I'll start off by talking about the palettes that I used once in July, and there's 18 of them. So let's kick it off with this palette from Lethal Cosmetics. This is the Avatar: The Last Airbender, and this is the Air version. This is what the palette looks like, and I guess I'll scooch over and include a picture of the look I did. This is a very fun palette. I do own all 4 that came out in this collection, but I will admit this is the only one I've used out of the 4 so far. I will say the quality is great. I've only used it a couple times, but I've really enjoyed the looks that I've done with it so far. For this look here, I was really going for like a yellowy neutral vibe. I feel like throughout July, there was a decent amount of yellow looks. So to create the look that you're seeing here, I used these 2 mattes and then these 2 mattes here. I also used the yellowy shimmer in the top corner. This one was a little bit unexpected because it ended up looking kind of silvery on the eye. I wasn't really going for a silvery look, but I do feel like it ended up making the look a lot more interesting than it probably would have otherwise. I actually really like how it turned out. And even though this look was a little bit unexpected because of the shift in the shimmer shade, I feel like it turned out really beautiful and I really loved it. Moving on, the next palette that I used once in July is the NARS Wanted palette. This one's probably my favorite NARS palette, although they are all pretty similar to be honest, but this one's definitely my most used. I am actually very sorry, but this is one of the only looks that I don't have a picture of, but this was like a very last minute, in a rush, just threw it together type of look. So I did kind of one of my go-to looks that I usually do with this palette, and it's usually a look that I like to do in the summer. So I just use this red shade all over the lid. The shade is not quite a matte. I don't know, I don't really want to define it as a satin because it's not quite there either, but it's like somewhere between a matte and a satin. It's a very soft shade. So I threw this one all over the lid and then I blended it out with this one and I just popped this corner shade on the inner corner. I've probably recreated that type of look several times with this palette. Sometimes I also incorporate this red shade on top of it, just if I want a little bit more dimension, but still not too much. And again, that's just kind of a favorite look for me using this palette. I just love kind of like a muted red shade in the summertime. Not something super punchy, but not quite a brown. Just something a little bit more interesting, and I feel like these tones are exactly that. So I love using this one. Again, I'm sorry I don't have a look, but it was very basic. The next palette that I used once in July was the Urban Decay Beached palette. This was actually part of a YouTube video, so I don't have a picture of this one either. But this is what the palette looks like. It's incredibly old. I feel like this was like a pre-COVID palette. That is the timeline I like to use to define how old something is. This was a pre-COVID palette. I'm quite confident. But if you're wanting to see this in action, this is included in one of the last videos I posted. It was like 3 easy looks for the summertime, and this was the first look. The next palette that I used once in July is the Spanglish palette from Alamar Cosmetics. I got this one in a BoxyCharm. I think it was actually like the BoxyCharm like sale section. I believe this was like the 2nd or 3rd palette that the brand came out with. And the reason I picked this up is because I got the first palette of theirs in like an actual BoxyCharm. And I absolutely loved it. The color story was really pretty. And I loved that palette. So I picked this one up. I probably shouldn't have. I think it was a mistake. And this is what the color story looks like. I find this a lot less inspiring than the other palette. I don't really know why I felt inclined to pick this one up. I think I just had the completionist mindset where I wanted everything that everyone released. And I'm not even gonna lie, using it in July was my first time dipping into this palette, and I've owned it for years. This is definitely one I could see myself getting rid of in the future, but anyway, let me show you a picture of the look I created. I did use a couple other palettes to complete this look, but from the Spanglish palette, I used these two shades here and then these two shades. I found the shimmers in this palette quite lackluster, but again, this is also a very old palette. I'm sure the brand has produced better shimmers at this point, and even the shimmers in their first palette I feel like were better than this one. But either way, I felt like I wanted just a little bit more than what this palette was giving me. So I also went in with this little palette from Beauty Bay. This one's been featured in these palette roundups for at least one other month, if not two. But this is what the palette looks like. It's just a great little addition if you're wanting something a little extra sparkly. At least from the shades I've used so far, they don't have a ton of base pigment. So I just find these to be really nice toppers. They don't overtake the look if you're just wanting a little extra sparkle. And to complete the look you're seeing now, I just dipped into this shade here. Totally forgot there's a little like name sheet here, but this shade is called Aurora. I will talk about this palette again later on in the video because I did use it a couple times this month. And finally, to finish off the look you're seeing, I also dipped into the Blend Bunny Forget Me Not palette. This palette's also been featured, I feel like in the last probably 2 or 3 months now as well. But for this look that you're seeing, I just used the white and the pink together on the inner corner. So this look counts for my one use using the Spanglish palette as well as the Forget Me Not palette. That was the only time I dipped into this one this month. The next palette that I used once in July is this one from Nomad. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this, but this one is the Cartagena palette. I'm so sorry if that's wrong. This one's definitely an older one from the brand, and I only dipped into one shade for this just to complete a look using another palette. I will post a picture of the look I did here, and from this palette, I just used this shade to deepen it up. And that unfortunately is my only use for this palette so far. I would love to dip into it again. It just is a very summery color story in my opinion. I definitely love reaching for tones like this throughout this time of the year, so hopefully I can dip back into this a little bit more in August. And the main palette that I actually used to create this look is the Bella Beauté Bar Pastel Garden palette. I will talk about this one again later in the video because I did use it a couple times in July. This is what the palette looks like. She's definitely a hefty one, but I've dipped into this a couple times now throughout the summer. This is just a really fun palette. I love the shimmers in here. The selection of mattes is really beautiful as well. To create the look that you're seeing, I used this shade, and this shade. And then I also dipped into this orange here as well. This one's definitely been a joy to play around with, and as I mentioned, we'll be talking about it again later in the video. I love this look though. I was really going for something warm and bright, and I really love the addition of the wing detail. I always feel like that makes pastels pop just a little bit extra. The next palette that I used once in July is the Dominique Cosmetics Latte 2. Here's what the palette looks like, and I'll post a picture of the look here. For this look, I also kind of went for the yellowy vibes, but this one was definitely a lot more toned down than the last one. So to create the look you're seeing on the screen, I obviously used this yellowy shade here. I deepened up the look with this shade, and I popped this one on the inner corner. I also used this bottom shimmer on the lid. I do enjoy the shimmers in this palette, but they are pretty basic. This one has a little extra sparkle in it, but these two are definitely more of your traditional shimmer formula. I do find them very smooth and flattering, but for the look here, I was feeling just something a little bit extra. So to finish it off, I reached for this single shadow from Urban Decay. This is one of their Moondust shadows in the shade Starlight. I feel like it just amped up the look a little bit more and made it a little bit more sparkly and special looking, so I enjoyed pairing these together. The next palette that I used once in July was the BH Mimosa palette. This is definitely a fun one for the summer, and I'd love to reach for it again in August. There's just a lot of bright, colorful, beautiful tones in here. I do tend to lean into the warmer tones a little bit in the summertime, so this is really a perfect summery palette for me. I'll post a picture of the look I created here. Don't at me for repeating my outfit, but yes, I wore the same shirt and did a similar look as the Dominique Cosmetics palette. So to create the look you're seeing here, I used pretty much this whole row, and then obviously this very bright punchy yellow, which was absolutely beautiful. This was definitely a more amped up version of the last look you saw, but it was very fun and I felt very cute and summery. The next palette that I used once in July is the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. So this one was actually featured in the same video as the Urban Decay one. It was my 3 easy looks for summer. So there is a tutorial using this one, and I don't have a picture of the look unfortunately. But as you can imagine, I created a pretty basic, somewhat smoky bronze look. If you have this palette and you're looking for some extra inspiration, I also have another video on my channel that was pretty recent as well using this palette. I actually used it in conjunction with the pastel palette to create, honestly, a similar look to what I'm wearing now. So if you're wanting to see a couple looks with this, they are now already up on my channel. And if you want to know how I created this look, you can also technically check out that video with the two Natasha Denona palettes. I did actually film the look that I'm wearing right now too, so if you're curious and you're wanting to see how I put this together, then that video will also be on my channel soon. So in that video where I'm doing 3 easy looks for summer, the third palette that I used was the Planet Spirit palette. This one was a collaboration between Odin's Eye and Baddie Bean. This came out several years ago, but to be honest, that video was the first time I reached for this one. In that video, I really focused on the pinks, and I dipped into the orange a little bit as well. The look was very basic, it was very easy to do, hence 3 easy summer looks is the title. So if you are curious, you could check out that video. This is definitely a fun color story for the summer though. I would love to dip into this palette some more. As I mentioned, I do tend to lean into the warmer tones in the summer, but I don't know, something about the green tones in this palette are really drawing me in, so I'd love to do something with those. But anyway, this is the next palette that I used once in July. The next palette that I used once in July is the Sea Siren palette from Sugar Drizzle Cosmetics. I have not dipped into this one very much either. It's definitely a punchier color story, very fun for the summertime, and I use this palette to create this look here. I did actually use this along with the Tarte in Bloom just to finish off the look. But from the Sea Siren palette, I used this shimmer here called Sea Maiden. This is absolutely beautiful. It's almost like a purple, bluey, shifty shade, but there's like specks of green in it. Let me swatch it. This is just stunning. This is such a fun shade. So anyway, I used that shimmer all over the lids. And then I was feeling a little more playful for this look. I wanted to do something just a little bit different. So I did a little double wing detail and I used this purple shade down here. There wasn't much I needed to add from the Tarte palette. I just wanted to kind of blend everything out a little bit. So I went in with the shade Sweetheart, and then on the inner corner, I used Charmer. I really love this look. I feel like it was a fun one, but it was still, in my opinion, it was subtle enough that I still felt comfortable wearing it to work. I do also wear glasses, and I feel like those do a really good job at hiding most of my makeup anyway. I know everyone's comfort level is a little bit different, but I felt like I was fine to get away with that small little detail, and I would do it again. So yeah, that was my only use with the Sea Siren palette. And I will talk about the Tarte palette again later on in the video. Actually, I'm going to talk about it again now because to create this look right here, I used the Tarte in Bloom palette in conjunction with the Unearthly Thinking of You palette. So the Unearthly palette is the primary one I used to create this look. I really wanted to play with the peaches and the reds together. I felt like that was just going to be a really pretty combination, and in my opinion, it was. So to create the look you're seeing here, I used the peachy shade and the red shade. I also went into Unraveled to deepen it up. And then for the shimmers, I used Twisted Fate and Fatal Thread. The only shade I used from the Tarte palette was the white, just to brighten up the inner corner a little bit. But in terms of the Thinking of You palette, I've only used this one twice so far, but I've really loved playing around with it. I find this to be a very versatile palette for a 9-pan at least. And I also feel like the tones just work very nicely together. I feel like you can very easily create something soft and romantic, but then you still have some depth within the palette as well. So I really appreciate that, and the shimmers are just absolutely stunning. So yeah, I loved reaching for this one again in July. The next palette that I used once in July is actually also a throwback from Tarte, but it's the original Clay Play palette. This is what the inside looks like, very basic and boring. It's an all matte palette, but definitely a reliable little workhorse palette. Also smells amazing, I would like to say. I did actually use this palette for a video as well, so I don't have a picture, but it was featured in my last single Saturday. And I just dipped into this one to create a very basic foundation for a look, and I topped over it with a couple of single shadows. So again, if you'd like to see this one in action as well, I encourage you to check that one out too. I also used this palette from Sigma once in July. This is the collaboration with Diana Saldana. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what prompted me to pick this palette up. This just was definitely not a palette I needed given my massive eyeshadow palette collection. But I mean, here it is. But either way, I got one use out of this in July. I will post a picture here of the look I did. It's actually kind of reminiscent of the one that I did with the NARS palette that I showed you. As I mentioned in the summertime, sometimes I really just crave like a muted red look, so I kind of created one with this palette. So to create the look you're seeing here, I obviously used this red matte shade as well as the shimmer shade. I used the shade Goals as well as Chai just to blend everything out. And then I did dip into a little bit of the black just to give me a bit more depth. And then I also used the white shade on the inner corner just to brighten everything up. I did enjoy the look. I know it was very basic, but I feel like if I'm not going for something super bright and punchy, then a lot of the times I am just going for tones like these in the summer. So I enjoy this look. I think this palette is really beautiful. Again, I definitely didn't need it, but I mean, I'm not mad at it. So the next look is going to be a very different vibe. Here it is. As you can see, I'd done a lot of basic, easy looks throughout July, so I wanted a little bit more drama for this next one. So the palette I used to create this look is the Ace Beauté Blossom Passion palette. So I kind of went with like a halo eye for this one. It was very intense. I don't know if Ace Beauté is a brand anymore or if they're still making eyeshadow palettes, but I will say they do not play with their pigment. I wanted some drama and this palette really just punched me in the face with the drama. So to create the look you're seeing, I used this shade as like the primary like transition shade. I also used these two shades to deepen up the look. And then I used this shimmer here. The look was definitely very bold and impactful, but I still think it was really stunning and I had a lot of fun dipping into this one. The next palette that I used once in July is the Jouer French Riviera, and I used this with two other palettes to create this look right here. So from the Jouer palette, I used the whole bottom row. I also used Soleil in the crease and then the shade on the inner corner, and I used this shimmer all over the lid. The shimmers in this palette are very lackluster. The actual tones of them are really pretty, and like in the pan, I feel like they look really stunning, especially that blue shade. But yeah, just not a lot of impact on the eyelids, so I did dip into a couple other things. One of them you might be able to guess was the Beauty Bay Mini Charms palette. But I dipped into the shade Ethereal down here just to top everything off and add a little more dimension into the look. And that wasn't quite enough for me, so I also dipped into another palette. This is the Very Old Alchemy palette by KVD. It's the Alchemist Holographic palette. And this is just like a palette of like kind of iridescent pastel shades. And I used this blue one just for the inner corner of the look. That was also my only use with the KVD palette. So both of these had one use in July. And I think this is the last palette I used once in July, but it's the Iconic London Day to Slay palette. And the name, I think, is just as horrible as the very bulky packaging. This is what the palette looks like. Definitely very basic and neutral. I'll show you a picture of the look that I did here. Also very basic and neutral. This was just a very quick look that I threw together, but I feel like it was very flattering. While I don't think this palette is anything special, I do feel like it offers like a pretty nice range of tones. And I mean, if you're looking for something quick and easy and flattering, I feel like this kind of color story is a great go-to. I will say my memory of what the formula was didn't quite match up to what I got from this palette. I do think the look was pretty, but I do feel like the formula is it's just a little bit lacking, maybe a little dated. And that's not always a deterrent for me. I'm not always willing to get rid of a palette just because the formula is a little bit dated. But if I'm being honest, just the bulkiness of this palette and the fact that I do have this color story probably 100 times over in my collection, this is one that might be featured in a future shopping blog video. I don't mean to shit on this palette. I do think the look that I created was pretty. It was very easy to put together. It just wasn't like that fun or inspiring to use. It was just very meh. So I don't know, she'll stick around for now, but maybe not forever. So those are all the palettes I used once in July. Let's move on to the palettes that got 2 uses. All right, the first palette that got 2 uses in July is the Bella Beauté Bar Pastel Garden. As I mentioned, I did use it that one time with the Nomad palette where I created the orange yellow look. I've dipped into this a couple times over the last couple months, and I feel like I just have a tendency to stick to like this part of the palette. So for my second look using this palette, I really wanted to play around with a couple different tones. So I created this look right here. This was a very fun one. I loved putting this together, and I actually used another Nomad palette to finish it off, which I'll talk about in a second. So from the Bella Beauté Bar palette, I used this shade here, and then I used these two kind of pinky purpley shades. And then I used this shade and this shade from the bottom row, and then I went in with Green Wizard all over the lid. Yes, I will swatch this out for you. Oh my god, this is like such a beautiful shimmer. Bella Beauté Bar really kills it with their shimmer formula. This is just a very dimensional, like green to pink. It's just super pretty. It's all over my fingers now, but that's okay. But I loved putting this look together. As I've said earlier in the video, I tend to reach for the warm tones a lot, so I really wanted to make a point to reach for the blues and greens, and I'm really happy that I reached into this palette to do it. And then to finish off this look, I went into the Nomad New Zealand Stargazing palette, and I just dipped into this dark blue shade for the liner detail. I feel that added a really nice touch. I'm always tempted to do a black wing when I play with pastels, but I feel like the blue was a good choice. It ended up being like a fun little twist, and again, I loved how the look came out. And yeah, those were my 2 looks using the Pastel Garden palette. The second palette that I used twice in July is actually this one from Nomad. So in addition to the last look, I also created this look right here. This one kind of had a similar vibe with the bold wing. Apparently I was just really into that, but to create the look you're seeing, I used these 2 shades as well as this brighter pink here, and I dipped into the black just for a little bit of depth. So I started off using this shimmer for the look, but something about it I feel like it didn't really go with the vibes that well. It is a very pretty shimmer, but it's a little bit of a multi-chrome. It's like a green to pink, and I think that green flip is kind of what threw me off for the look. It just didn't really go, so I dipped into another palette to finish off the look. Can you guess what palette it is? It's this one. So just to bring a little bit more of the pink back and a little bit more brightness into the look, I just dipped back into Aurora to finish it off. Even though I felt the need to dip into another palette, I do think this one is beautiful from Nomad. I really enjoyed using it, and I'm excited to create some more looks with it. The next palette that I used twice in July, I've already talked about both times that I used it, but it was the Tartelette In Bloom palette. So as I mentioned, I use this with the Sea Siren palette with the double wing, and then I also used it with the Unearthly Thinking of You. I just love how easy and reliable this palette is, and it's definitely a staple in my collection. The next palette that I used twice in July is the Simply Posh Down to Earth palette. This one just looks like a summery, beachy dream. I did 2 different looks with this. I didn't really love the first one, but I'll show you a picture here. I was kind of going for a 2-toned look. I'm just gonna hold it like this so it's easier to show you and keep the picture up. But to create this look, I used these 2 greens for the green portion. And then for the orangey, peachy portion, I used this shade, and then this one, I believe. I ended up using these 2 shimmers in the look, and I think that's kind of what threw me off a little bit. This orange called Sunbaked is a very stunning shade. It's very pretty, but it has a pretty strong blue shift in it, and I just felt like that one kind of threw the look off because there weren't really any blues in it. So, I mean, the shades are really pretty. I don't think the look was bad. I think just, again, that shift kind of threw it off for me. Yeah, like even when I swatch it out, the shift is very strong. It's not a super orangey shade in my opinion. I think if I want to use that shimmer again, I would just do a look using like these 6 instead of dipping into like the greens. I feel like that would be a little bit more cohesive. I didn't hate the look, I just found that it didn't go as much as I wanted it to, so I tried to redeem myself on the second look. I'll post a picture of that look here, and I will say when I did the second look, it was definitely like several days after the first one, and I don't think I realized I used pretty much the same shades, but I do feel like this one came out a little bit more cohesive. So to create this look, I used these 3 shades in the palette as well as this one down here. And then I only use this shimmer all over the lid. I do think this one came out a little bit better. I primarily used these 2 on the inner corner. I did add the yellow on the inner part of the lower lash line, if I remember correctly. I just feel like the tones of the shades I picked for this look were a little bit more cohesive and they went together a little bit better. I will mention too, to finish off the look, I used this Super Shock on the inner corner. This is just a very pale yellow. It's in the shade Beloved from ColourPop. The next palette that I used twice in July is the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. If you hear anything in the background, Atlas needed some company, so he's right behind me. But I'll show you a picture of the first look here. The vibe of this one is sort of similar to the one I did with the Unearthly palette. I just kind of focused on the peachy shades and then I deepened it up with some of the reds. So I primarily used these 2 shades and then I used Clove to deepen it up on the outer portion. I feel like the shade Morning was kind of like the focal point of like the peachy aspect of the look, but I did also use Jasper and Clove to deepen things up. For the shimmers, I used Laurel here, and then I also used this one to kind of merge the light shimmer with the deeper matte. For the shimmers, I used Laurel, and then I also went into this one to kind of bridge Laurel with the deeper red matte. I don't know why I wasn't really expecting much from this palette. This is definitely one of my least used palettes and I've had it for a very long time. There's just something about the color story when I first look at it. I feel like it's just not one I'm gonna jive with, but I actually really enjoyed using it and I love the looks that I put together. I feel like there's like a softness to the shadows that you can even kind of see in this look right here. I just felt like the look was very... I just feel like the look was very flattering and it was very easy to create, which I appreciate. So for the second look I created with the Sunrise palette, I was going for kind of sunset vibes or sunrise vibes. Sorry. I do feel like for sunset vibes, I probably should have dipped into the yellows, but I feel like I just maybe forgot about that. But here's a picture of the look here. I do feel like it still turned out really pretty. So to create this look, I used pretty much the whole middle row except for this shimmer here. I also used these two mattes as well as Dayspring. This look was a little bit more intense than the last one, but I do still feel like it was pretty like wearable. And I just have a newfound appreciation for this palette. I'm not sure why I was so hesitant to use it. Maybe I was a little bit intimidated by the color story, but it's really beautiful and I'm excited to play around with it some more. Say hi to Atlas again. He just loves being in the videos, or he just hates when Mummy films. I think that's probably it. You're so handsome now. Look at how handsome you are. So handsome. Yes, thank you. We better wrap this up soon. Thank you. It's a sassy look if I've ever seen one. Let's take a quick Atlas intermission. So I don't remember exactly what I was saying, but I used the Sunrise palette twice in July and I'd love to reach for it again this month. Those are the palettes that I've used twice in July, and let's finish off the video with the palettes that I used 3 times. So I have 2 palettes that fall into that category, and the first one I feel like you should be able to guess was the Beauty Bay Mini Charms. As mentioned, I used this one with the Alamar Spanglish palette. I also used it with the Nomad New Zealand palette, and then again with the palette from Jouer. Not to be repetitive, but I've loved having this one on hand. It's just really perfect to complete a look or just spice it up a little bit more. I think for the fall, I might put this one back and then reach for another all shimmer palette. Now that I've gotten into a little bit more of a groove of like reaching for a palette like this, I would like to show similar palettes a little more love as well. Some of these tones would be nice in the fall, but I do feel like this is also a really nice winter palette, so you'll probably see this one again in a couple months. But yeah, the Mini Charms got 3 uses in July. The last palette that I used 3 times in July, and the last palette we're going to talk about for the video, is the Huda Beauty Desert Dusk. This is a very summery color story in my opinion. I always think of summer when I look at this palette, so I was really happy to reach for it over the last month. Here's a picture of the first look that I created with this palette. It was a little bit more intense, but I do think it was kind of sultry and sexy at the same time. To create this look, I used pretty much the whole top row except for this cool tone shade here. I don't really know why that's in the palette, although I guess it would kind of go with some of the shimmers and maybe the purpley shades, but I don't think I've even touched that shade in the palette since I've owned it, but I digress. Again, I used like pretty much the first row for the look. I also dipped into the shimmer here and then the red shade. Again, this one was a little bit more dramatic, but as I've also mentioned early in the video, I do really love those kind of like more rich, muted red tones in the summer, and it was kind of fun to achieve that type of look with different palettes, including this one. Here's a picture of the second look I did with this palette. I used almost all the same shades, but I leaned a little bit more into the oranges for this one. So to create this look, I also used pretty much the whole top row except for these 2 shades here. And then instead of dipping to the red, I used the orange for this look, and then I used this shimmery shade right here. I can't check the pictures on my phone because I'm filming right now, but if I'm remembering correctly, I think this look I wore with a pale yellow shirt, and I feel like the lippy kind of threw things off. I feel like I should have gone lighter with the lip or darker with the shirt because it looked a little bit disjointed altogether. But the eye look itself, I feel like was really pretty. It still gave the warm, sultry, summery vibes. And then here is a picture of the third look I did with the Desert Dusk palette. For this one, I was kind of also going for like a sunset sort of vibe. I wanted to incorporate some of the purple, but I feel like it disappeared a little bit. So to create the look you're seeing here, I used Eden as kind of the primary like crease shade. I used the orange and the red to add more definition, and then to deepen things up, I actually mixed the brown shade with the purple. I felt like the purple on its own wouldn't give me quite enough depth, so I did mix it with this one. But I think in doing that, the purple kind of got lost. You don't really see it in the look. And for the shimmers in the look, I used this one here, which kind of feels like a little bit more of a satin, and I used these two as well. Again, I couldn't really notice the purple. It kind of got lost. I feel like I should have committed or maybe like used Summer Royal. That might have helped. But either way, I feel like the look turned out really pretty overall. But yeah, that will conclude the 3 looks with the Desert Dusk palette, and that will also conclude the video. I feel like it was lighter outside when I started filming this, so I hope I was still able to do it relatively quickly. But I do want to thank you for spending your time watching the video, especially if you made it to the end. I really appreciate it. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know if there's any palettes you tend to gravitate to in the summer, if there's certain color combinations you're drawn to, or certain styles of makeup. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. But other than that, that's going to wrap it up for the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!